Hello everyone, my name is Sebastian. I'm a long-time German language professional and today I will be your Hollywood language consultant. Because it'll be Christmas soon, today's subject of study will be German in Die Hard. Before we dive into the movie, shall we take a quick look at our supposed German terrorist group?
Who said we were terrorists?
What? Well, it's not me, certainly not me, Hans. It was, IMDb. IMDb said it. I'm just here for the German part of it all, okay?
Perfect.
Whew. Okay, now that we've got this out of the way, let's look at our friendly group of party crashers. First of all, I have to commend how progressive this was for the 1980s. A group of, air quotes, German, including a black guy, an Asian guy, a dude who speaks Italian, and a dude who speaks French. That's quite something. Not the cast I would have pictured. Certainly not in the 80s. I mean, yeah, for reference, look at this. This is the German Soccer World Championship team of 1990. A bunch of white dudes with porn stashes. I love it. Anyway, back to the cast. Alan Rickman, of course, is British. We all know that 30 years later, even though he was new back then. But what about the rest? Out of our 13 terrorists, we have 3 real Germans and 1 token Austrian. And strangely enough, 2 of those actual Germans get Anglophone names, James and Tony. And yes, I consider Tony to be an English name, since German Tonys are typically not spelled with a Y, but with I, because it's usually short for Anton. Wikipedia confirms this for me. I think a minus is in order. Okay, let's roll the movie. There's a surprising amount of German in this. Let's get to it. We have the bad guys arriving in a Mercedes because of course they are. First, we're sticking with our German-born, English-named Tony because he's the first one to have German lines.
Links, rechts und wieder links.
Says left, right, and left again. It's a native actor, native lines, just how it's supposed to be. And while Tony is working, Karl comes down and we get more German.
Hey Bruder.
Moment! Nein, warte doch nicht!
Let's start with Tony's lines first, since that's quicker. Native German speaker, as I mentioned, his lines are perfect, exactly the way I would have said it. Karl, on the other hand, well, first of all, he only says 2 words and the accent is already glaring. The way he says Bruder.
Hey Bruder.
Secondly, that is not how brothers would talk. Just Bruder, I would attribute to a sociolect when talking to someone who is not your biological brother, like how bro is used today, or how in the black community people may refer to each other as brother. I would never address my real brother this way. Rather, I'd say something like Bruder Herz, which means my dear brother, or since Tony is the younger brother, he could also use the diminutive Brüderchen. That is common as well. But just Bruder in this situation? No way, Jose. The baddies enter the party and round up the guests. We hear James shouting. Los, raus, los is fine. The rest he says I can't understand, that's why I won't score it. However, my question is, they all clearly speak English to some extent, so why would he be shouting in German instead of English? He wants the people to comply after all, right? For that, they need to understand him. Normally I'd say that merits half a point of deduction, but it could be for intimidation. Right? German is a scary language to some people, so I don't know. Let me know what do you think in the comments. Should I have included it in the score? The guests start to panic, chaos everywhere. We are in the middle of it, and there's a lot of German going on. I'm hearing the following. To score all this is quite difficult. It's all more or less correct German. I'm not sure the intonation and intent always fit the situation. Volume and lips also seem weirdly off, and on top of that, it's the kind of dialogue that looks much better on paper than in the actual scene. But the director doesn't know this, because he doesn't speak German, doesn't have a consultant. That's probably why this whole scene is very, very different in the German dub. Maybe someday I'll let you in on that, on how this movie got reshaped for Germany. But I have to score the scene somehow, so let's say half minus. I liked some things but didn't like others. Enter Hans. Let's talk about him for a second. Movies live and die with their villain. And Alan Rickman is fantastic here. One of the best bad guys of all time, if you ask me. And he looks the part. Totally looks like a German business executive. His German accent, though, well, there is none. No accent, no speech mannerisms, the expressions, the choice of vocab. None of it suggests that the character is German. Sometimes he says Heinrich, sometimes he says Heinrich. He's German by name and because the script says so, and that's it. Hell, if I didn't know his name was Hans Gruber, which in the German version he isn't, he's called Jack, I would have never known he was supposed to be German. And the bad German he speaks later just underlines that. I don't know what he channels for this role, but it is not German. Still, I love Alan Rickman. Perfect bad guy here. Alright, let's move on. We'll ignore that Heinrich speaks English to Uli, since Uli doesn't look particularly German. Even though the name could be short for German Ulrich, we have Ulis, but we'll say he's just tacked on like Theo is. Why he's speaking English with Hans though, that's less obvious. There is a random 9 thrown into the English conversation. I think that's for flair. It doesn't hurt anything. It's not so realistic, but fine by me. I can appreciate some flair. Tony finds McLean and we have him pulling off a real German accent. Native German, as I mentioned earlier, but his English is pretty fantastic. The accent is so slight. But alas, that's the last we get to see of Tony and his German. Ding! Does the elevator, and our Austrian Fritz sees the dead Tony and shouts, "Es ist Tony! Er ist tot!" It is Tony, he is dead. And while that's technically correct, it is too English for my liking. It's a straight up translation, and if you ask me, it should have been something more starting with a curse word, and then he should have simply said, "Tony is tot." Tony is dead. And that would have felt natural. And then we finally hear Hans speak German for the first time.
Was habe ich dir gesagt? Was habe ich dir gesagt? Ich will, dass es keiner sieht.
Haltet sie zurück. Ich sage es zum letzten Mal.
Well, it's German, but with a heavy accent. He's struggling with the words and it doesn't sound natural. Once again, correct lines that sound good on paper, but not in the actual situation. And it also ends abruptly. He says, "I'll say this one last time." And then he doesn't say anything and continues in a different conversation. Fritz consequently radios Karl and says,
Karl, komm sofort runter.
Franco, you and Fritz take the body upstairs and out of sight. I don't want the hostages to think too much.
Ich weiß nicht, wie ich es erklären soll, aber komm sofort, schnell.
Funnily enough, as he speaks, his Austrian accent becomes more and more prevalent. Well, all in all okay, that's a plus. When Karl then learns of his brother's demise, we get the old movie trope of two foreigners who share a common native language still speaking English to each other.
English, motherfucker, do you speak it?
Guys named Hans and Karl, mind you. This doesn't make any sense, especially in a riled up emotional state. Deduction incoming. After McLean escapes the firefight on the roof, we hear Fritz mumbling something Austrian. It's hard to understand, but I think I'm hearing this. He actually says the word Dachboden, attic, as in the storage room underneath the roof. The German word literally means the floor of the roof. That's not something you would find on a skyscraper, and if you did, it would certainly have a different name. That seems to be his thing, as we see from the next conversation, which quickly follows.
Jo, einer, hat ein Maschinengewehr.
Haben Sie ihn gefunden?
Karl ist mit mir. Wir sind im Heizehaus unter dem Dach. Im Heizehaus unter dem Dach.
Wo ist Karl?
He's in elevator shaft. Hast du das gehört?
Perfect.
Where to begin? Fritz is just spewing nonsense again. The actor is probably improvising, making up his lines, and seems to be struggling with that task. So einer, such a guy, such a dude, took me a while to even understand because it just doesn't make sense in context. He also makes up the word Heizerhaus, heater house, which isn't a real word. I'm not even sure what a heater house is supposed to be and why it would be under the roof. And on top of that, he doesn't answer to a single one of Hans's lines, which are clearly edited in after the fact. Hans himself doesn't fare much better. At least Rickman practiced these lines very well. They sound almost natural without accent. Almost. But, well, first of all, he uses the formal address Sie, as if he's addressing strangers and not his buddies or henchmen. He should have said informal plural ihr. I mean, Fritz is also addressing him with informal du. Why would Hans use formal language? Secondly, wie meinen, while asking the right question, is stylistically a faux pas. You can use that between two highbrows talking face to face. He could have said that to Takagi, for example, but not to a henchman on the radio. And then we have Karl once again choosing English in the middle of an otherwise German conversation.
English, motherfucker, do you speak it?
Why? Quite atypical for a supposedly German character. And Hans is then happy to oblige and continue the conversation in English because we don't know why. I don't know if one big minus is enough for this, but well, we're scoring scene by scene, so here goes. Hi, FutureSep here. Sorry to interrupt. This analysis turned out to be a little bit longer than expected. I had to cut it into two parts. I will leave a link to part 2 in the description. Be sure to check it out. The best is yet to come. See you there!